Good with your leg on bottom?
I don't want to be on top.
You never want to be on top.
That will start a world of speculation.
Zelph. On the shelf.
Let's first start out by acknowledging Tanner's shirt, which is available on our Etsy store, and if you want one, you should get one because we're poor. Today we want to talk about something that I'm honestly surprised we haven't talked about before, and it's...
We have in our blog.
We have on our blog, that's true, but we haven't talked about it in a YouTube video. And it's this idea that Mormons have that when people leave the Mormon church, they can leave it, but they can't leave it alone. So we just wanted to spend some time today kind of discussing that whole concept, I guess, and kind of share our thoughts on it.
So I think the first thing you could do is turn around the question and say, how come the church can leave the world, but can't leave the world alone? Because no matter what the church says about letting people live their lives, the church has a long history of trying to influence politics to favor church members and to impose their religious values on other people. We saw this with Prop 8. If you haven't seen the documentary Prop Hate...
I haven't.
Oh, it's so good. You have to see
Where
it.
is
It'll
it?
just... I don't remember. We'll look it up and find it, but so good. And then right now what the church is doing with Prop 2...
in Utah, trying to ban people from having medical marijuana, which is... Whew.
It's just...
It's tough.
It's... I shouldn't be surprised at this moment, and I guess I never really am, but I'm always just like amazed at how hypocritical the church can be. They're like, we believe in agency, we believe in freedom, we believe in, all these things, and it's like, but when it comes down to like giving that to other people...
Yeah.
Total
and I think
hypocrisy.
in the past I kind of assumed that the church was like familiar with the science but just didn't agree with it. And things that have happened in recent years have made me think like they kind of genuinely might not understand it, like people at the top level of leadership.
No. They have legal advice, but they don't get like scientific advice.
Like I was just thinking the other day, this is kind of off topic. We're going to get to the topic, we swear. But I was thinking about how they're very anti-pornography. And let's just like for the sake of this discussion assume that pornography is bad and leads to addiction.
Sure.
Well, what causes addiction is a lack of connection, and so promoting this like shame-based avoidance of pornography is like actually the worst thing you can do if you want people to not be addicted to pornography.
Totally.
And so I was just thinking about that the other day, and I was like, it's such a relatively small thing, like no one's ever going to leave the church over that, but it's just such a glaring sign that these men are not inspired, because like shame is such an outdated way to control people.
Yeah, totally.
It doesn't work, and it leads to worse outcomes, like the opposite outcomes than like the brethren are trying to produce, which is that people won't watch porn. If anything, like the shame is just driving them to it more. So I'm like, that's just such a one of many examples of how they're just not inspired.
Yeah, I think the church is sort of reflective and a part of like corporate America, and corporate America is learning the same thing. And I think millennials are changing that and saying like, listen, we don't do like shame-based, like you can't like guilt me into doing things if you can.
Millennials are great.
Can I just give it up for millennials? Wah!
Tana just outed us from millennials. The first thing I wanted to just point out is that there actually are plenty of people who leave the Mormon church and leave it alone. And I guess just like in the world generally, it's always the loudest voices that seem to be noticed. So while, say, me and Tanner have decided to keep talking about the Mormon church and our issues with it after leaving, I feel like for every one of us, there's 10 people that never bring it up, kind of, because they just don't want to.
It's
like,
just irrelevant to them at that point.
Exactly. It's very, I mean, I think part of it is like when you leave the church, like I think if you kind of just outgrow it in high school, you're maybe a lot more likely to kind of leave it alone. But if you have like this big...
He can leave the video, but he can't leave me alone.
But if you have this big experience kind of more as an adult, where you realize the church isn't true, I feel like you're maybe more likely to not leave it alone, just because you realize how traumatizing it is.
And ultimately, the whole thing is just a classic thought-stopping cliche.
Exactly.
Which is a common tactic used by high-demand religions.
Yep.
The C-word cult is sort of, faux pas these days.
We don't like to use it on this
Not
channel,
in
we
vogue.
only like to imply it.
Yeah. On our blog, whole different thing.
Different story, it's a shit show on there, free for all.
Anyway, it's the whole point of it is to just put someone in this box of like, oh, yep, they're just fitting the bill exactly like the prophets warned, without actually considering how unrealistic it is for so many people and what might drive someone who's left the church to continue talking about it. For me, leaving the church was like recognizing that you escaped from a burning building that you didn't know was on fire. You kind of like, you followed your heart and your brain out of it, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, that's pretty messed up back there. And naturally, you have like a desire to both just like tell your story, which Mormons kind of expect you to, you know, go with your head down, your tail between your legs, and, you know, don't say anything, just sit down, shut up.
I'm like shifting around so much I like can't get comfy.
It's your inner yogi is like,
like
downward dog.
I've been seeing in a lot of unflattering positions. Anyway, carry on.
Sound just like the whole
Carry on.
Jeez, I forgot where I was now. I got so
wrapped up in this idea that they can't leave it alone is like, oh, well, if you leave the church, then you won't think it's true, and you might tell people that, which is just like, yeah, duh. Like, you spent your whole life as a Mormon being taught the importance of spreading truth, and then you find out that the stuff you were taught as true is not true. Of course, you're completely wired to want to share that with other people.
Especially when you come from a background that programmed you to want to always share the things that you believe, to tell your story, to live your truth, to let others know every member a missionary, right?
But it's so hard because you're coming up against all these people, a lot of whom you really, really love and who are like your tribe, your community, who have been conditioned to believe that if someone's speaking out in that way against their belief system, they are inherently bad. Like, there is no legitimate reason someone would do that. Because as we've both experienced, like, when you leave the LDS church, most of the time when you talk to faithful people about your reasons for leaving, they won't accept it. Like, for example, I've had a lot of exchanges with, like, there's this one BYU Mormon YouTuber who I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, who I've had a number of exchanges with on the Zelph Twitter, who has just numerous times basically said that we're liars. Like, he refuses to accept that we speak up about the LDS church because we don't think it's true and we think it's harming people. Like, there always has to be that insinuation that you are sinning, you're dishonest. Like, they will never take your reasons for leaving at face value.
Because there's no context in which we can be right.
There's no space in their narrative of the church being true for someone genuinely trying their hardest to remain in this church that is their entire life, and it was their entire lives, and just discovering that I can't believe this. Like, the evidence doesn't support it. As much as I want it to be true, it isn't. Like, there's no space for that in their narrative. So they have to impose their own narrative on your story, which sucks, because it sucks to have someone invalidate your story.
Everyone just wants to be heard.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we've learned from doing kind of ex-Mormon, anti-Mormon stuff over the years is that we don't want to invalidate Mormon stories. So as much as we can say, like, you know, we don't think that experience that they had with the Spirit means what they think it means, we still accept that they had it and they felt that way, and that was still a very genuine experience to them, and like is potentially sacred to them. Like, we're not trying to shit on that. We're just trying to kind of reframe it and bring more facts to light.
That's usually the biggest argument, or at least like reply that I get to people is like, I just can't deny the experiences that I've had. And I'm like, I'm not trying to say that like the fact that you had a real experience to you happened. It's just a new classification of facts, because until you've been able to analyze the evidence, which it's crazy that the church claims to be this objectively, universally true thing, and yet refuses to analyze the objective evidence about it. You know, it's like it's objectively true. You have to believe this as real history, but we don't have to like prove it to you. And as Hitchens says, anything that can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without.
Except there actually is a ton of evidence.
There actually is a ton of. Is that what? Did I say that right?
It's like if someone's like, prove to me that unicorns don't exist, you'd just be like, there's no evidence that they exist. And someone's like, prove to me the Book of Mormon isn't true, and you're like, there's no evidence that it's true. It's like the same concept. And not only that, the stuff, there's just so much. I want to do a series on the Book of Mormon because there's just so much wrong with it. And until you've become aware of those things, which the church doesn't want you to find out about, and you know, then you're on no grounds to evaluate the objectivity of the whole thing. Yeah. So essentially a big reason that people don't leave the church alone when they leave is because it's not true. And at one point they believed it was true, and that guided their entire life. And then they discovered new information. And so obviously when you discover new information, your natural inclination is to want to share it with others. Like if we read something interesting in a book, we'll tell each other. Yeah. And so when it's with something as huge as your religion, your entire worldview, of course you're going to want to share that with people.
It's sort of like, it's not like finding out Walmart uses slaves, slave labor, and just not shopping at Walmart anymore. It's like realizing that your whole worldview, your whole life, everything you thought about yourself, about your place in the world, how the world operates, is gone. Yeah, and then the people who should love you and care about you the most, who should be most Christ-like in their willingness to extend grace to you, to understand where you're coming from, to mourn the loss of your faith with you, are completely unwilling to validate you in any way, to give any legitimacy to your story, to hear you out, to read the things you've read, to ask the questions you've asked.
Which, when you're grieving, is just going to make you feel even more, like, frustrated and like you want to share this stuff because you're like, nobody's listening, like, you guys don't get it, you know? It's like waking up in the Matrix or whatever metaphor you want to use. And it's not even like politics. Like, politics is kind of a good example because there are some things in politics where one side will believe something and you're like, no, there is like legitimate facts and evidence that show that you are wrong. Like, this isn't like an opinion thing. But then with politics, there's also like, you know, Republicans/conservatives tend to be more individualist and Democrats tend to be more collectivist. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong there. It's just kind of your
worldview. Value thing.
Yeah. Whereas this is kind of different because it's like, no, these things objectively are not true and did not happen in the way that you have been taught that they happened, and you, because you like fully related to how Mormons believe, like you thought as they thought, of course you're going to want to share with them what you've learned because you get it, like you get where they're coming from, and there's nothing more frustrating than like one way understanding and then having someone else be like, no, you don't get it, you must have never had a real testimony, you must not have tried, you must have sinned, and you're like, no, I have been where you are. Every argument you're making I have made before, and I've discovered that I was wrong. Like there's no way to really communicate that, but you want to so desperately because it's your whole life.
Right. And to be honest, like the sort of personal trauma of leaving the church that drove me and you to start Zelph, like I don't feel that so much now. It's not this like, I need to like be heard and I need to be validated. I just want my Mormon friends and family to understand where I'm coming from. That's not really the point. In fact, we don't make these videos for active Mormons. It's really pretty much the people who are who have encountered the things and who are transitioning out, just to give, some perspective and a little levity to them.
We took a year off of Zelph because we just started not being interested in Mormon stuff anymore, and we were just growing so much in other ways, and we would like kind of maintain a light social media presence, which is what kind of kept us afloat. And then after that year, I think we just kind of realized like we would have a lot of people coming up to us and being like, oh, this really helped me, or the way you said that like helped me explain something to my family, or like you helped me laugh when I was feeling like so full of despair after leaving the church. Like we would get this really positive feedback from people who really don't have a support system, because it can be so lonely leaving the church, leaving your entire community and not getting support from the people that are supposed to be like your rocks, that I think we just realized like this is something we still want to do, even if it's not kind of our primary interest. Like people are our primary interest, and like helping people is our primary interest, and so this is like just a way
we can do that.
Yeah, I'm not trying to like get on a pedestal or like be like we're so great, but I'm just trying to explain that like people feel kind of called to talk about the church once they leave it, because they recognize that number one, people are believing in something that's objectively false, and there are a lot of ways that for a lot of people they're being harmed by it, even though there's also a bunch of people that are like, no, my life is great because of the Mormon church, and like they seemingly have no issues with it. And then there's also people that are leaving that like have no support system and don't hear voices like ours. When we left the Mormon church, I'll just keep chatting, there weren't people like us talking about this stuff. Like there were amazing people like John DeLynn who were like getting into kind of like the meat of everything, but there weren't a ton of like young people just being like, yeah, I left and life is good. And it just felt like it was the world of ex-Mormonism for me when I left just all felt so serious and like scary. And so I think
there was a level of anonymity to it, like
a
lot of people were afraid
scared. And that's the thing, like Mormons will always be like, oh, you can't leave it alone, like you're so hateful, but they don't realize how many people are like terrified into silence. Like they're so full of fear, they can't even tell their families how they feel because they know they're gonna get like rejected by the people they love the most. Banksy is inside a backpack. What's your deal? There's no food in there.
He's really looking for a good rummage.
Just looking for a good time.
I like what you said about emphasizing the goodness of life outside of the church, because as we've transitioned out from being like, this is really hard and personally very difficult, we've got to a place where it's like, the year we spent off just sort of finding ourselves or whatever, It was really helpful in like I felt like Kimmy Schmidt a bit, like kind of coming out of this under the ground bunker and being like, wow, I've got to experience the world, and it's been a really great time, and we feel like life is better outside of the church. So it's not entirely that we just like the Mormon narrative that we have no sense of purpose now, so all we can derive, the only satisfaction we can derive out of life is by criticizing and tearing down or whatever. And it's like, that's not it at all. We live very fulfilled, like holistic, for a lack of a better word,
we get
lives.
So many comments from people being like, get a life, or like, you're obviously miserable, you wouldn't criticize this thing. And for me, like, the fact that I'm now able to talk about it kind of with, like, I feel a level of detachment now that obviously you don't feel when you first leave, because like, you're in a grieving process. Like, that's another thing I wish Mormons would understand, is that when you, even if you're a Mormon and you're watching this video and you can't accept that the church isn't true, just understand that like the people leaving genuinely believe it's not true. And so like, just try and imagine however you can that was your worldview. Like, these aren't people that are like, I know it's true, but I'm gonna resist it because it's too hard. Or like, these are people that genuinely want it to be true but do not think it is. So even if you think the church is true, you should still be able to acknowledge that the people saying they don't. Like, that's another thing I encountered on Twitter and stuff, is like people saying, like, implying that almost like we know it's true, we just don't want to admit it. And it's like, that's just absurd. Yeah. It's just like a nonsense idea, because like, we do not think it's true. Even if you do, you have to acknowledge that we don't. It's like, we can acknowledge that for Mormons. We're not like, oh, you guys are all lying to yourselves. We're like, no, we get it. You guys genuinely believe it's true.
Yeah, we can believe each other's stories about our own like authenticity and intention. Yeah. It is sad that that's so infrequently a two-way street with believers, is that we can say like, I get that it's real and it's true to you. I understand with that, and like, if that's the way you want to go with your life, then I can't be upset at you or wish it any other way. But I just wish that would be returned, even though we're like very different, and even if our approach to the church is very different, even if we're like, mortal enemies in that sense, we don't have to like hold to these false narratives about each other harboring this secret evil, or like you said, just like knowing that it's true and just raging against that because we hate ourselves so much or whatever. I don't
It's never a good sign when your beliefs require you to invalidate someone else's story to maintain belief. Like, if you have to create your own narrative about someone else's experience, it's generally not a good sign that your belief's that solid. Anyway, I feel like there was a point I was making with all of this, but I've lost it because I started talking about grief.
It's hard to leave the church alone.
It's hard to leave your religion. So I think is important to know, or to be aware of, that Mormons aren't, is that grief involves anger. Anger is a really legitimate part of the grieving process. It's incredibly psychologically normal. And if you find out that you have been lied to, even if you're a Mormon and you're watching this and you don't agree that they've been lied to, just accept that from their perspective, they've been lied to. They believe they've been lied to. Even if you can't accept that they have, like, just let's work with that premise.
Try some empathy. So
that you can move along with us. Be nice.
As I'm wearing this shirt.
Anyway, when you find out that you have been lied to, that your entire worldview is wrong, and then you're also faced with the trauma of the loved ones in your life rejecting you and invalidating you and belittling you and smearing your character, you are absolutely, like most of the time, going to go through a legitimate grieving process, of which anger is an important part. So it is kind of hard for me because I'll see ex-Mormons say certain things online that are just that are like really angry,
just like
and I'm
dripping
like,
with
and I'm like, oh, if I was a Mormon, like that's really not helping our cause, and like it's not. But at the same time, it's like I wish there was just more awareness that those people are grieving, and it's completely legitimate that they're feeling that way. Yeah. I wish Mormons would have more compassion. And in general, most Mormons I've spoke to like can't really accept that ex-Mormons wanted the church to be true, found out it wasn't, and went through a grieving process. Like, that's so hard for them to understand because it's so far outside of their narrative of the church being true, and they can't understand why God would like let that happen, or it goes against everything they've been taught about how you have a testimony and how you have faith, to hear that someone was like doing all the right things and wanted it to be true and was trying their best and found that it wasn't.
For the people who do sort of lash out angrily toward the church, the other thing is that, like, I mean, sometimes I think that, like, oh, and I've been told in our videos, like the Joseph Smith rap, the Brigham Young rap. It was like, if you truly had respect for Mormons, you wouldn't mock our beliefs and things like that. And the thing is people were at every level of my like embitterment toward the church. There were people saying you shouldn't be doing this. Even when I was like right when I left the church and was so nice about it, just gave a mile and only wanted an inch. You know what I mean? And just went so far above and beyond trying to be kind and respectful about the whole thing. There were still people who were like, how dare you, and da. So it's like, because even if I were to come out in the temple garments and like have sex with a dude, like there would still, it doesn't matter, at every point there would be people who'd be upset at me for doing it. And so like, you know, saying angry things, it's kind of like, it doesn't help, but at the same time, like, there are more skillful ways of approaching it, and you kind of, you know, once you process and...
But like writing a comedy rap about a dead person who like did a lot of bad stuff, in my book, is like not disrespectful at all.
A relevant quote that I think of all the time from Emerson, he says, "Never let me fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming that I am persecuted when I am contradicted." And Mormons have a huge persecution complex that goes all the way back to Missouri, where they think that anytime someone disagrees with them, that is persecution. And yet, they're often the ones who are actually persecuting, taking legal measures to try to delegitimize other people. Whereas like contradicting someone, even insulting Joseph Smith, or, you know, saying, you know, making light of sacred things, that's not persecution.
It doesn't like actually hurt anyone.
It doesn't actually hurt your feelings, but it doesn't, we're not like taking legal measures to even, actually I take that, maybe I am, because I really believe we should tax the churches.
For sure. And like it would
But even that's not persecution. That's just like, you just need to be like everyone else. If you're trying to be political, then you need to play by the politics rules.
And you would be hurt if you're a Catholic and you heard the way that Mormons have talked about Catholics. Or who is it that Joseph Smith had
abominable
is it
church.
The Methodists or the Lutheran?
Joseph Smith was fond of the Methodists.
Okay, I feel like he was always bitching about the Methodists.
No, he was chill with the Methodists.
What was the church he was always bitching about?
I don't know.
I swear it was the Methodists. Anyway, like, other churches would be offended by the things Mormons say. Like, at a certain degree, at a certain point, it's not...
I mean, just by saying that your way is the one true way...
It's, like, inherently offensive.
Based on evidence that you are unwilling to, like, truly understand. And it's so weird that, like, as a Mormon, I believed that I had something that no one else in the world had. And it's like, I had never lived another religion, or like practiced another religion, lived among another culture, like experienced other people at their happy moments, or their like talked about their transcendent experiences, and yet I was like, I'm so special. And so the Mormons don't realize how truly like condescending it is to say, this is the one true way that works for everybody, so you have to conform to my thing. It's like, you don't know anything about anyone else's life. Like,
and there's converts, but I'm one too, so nice try.
But that's the thing, is there's converts to every religion.
Exactly,
And so that's not like a test, you know.
And having lived like one other type of life doesn't automatically make you any more qualified. Like,
no, sure.
Well, Kwaku, the Free Mormons guy, who is a convert, will often use like being a convert as if it's some kind of higher authority, because like he wasn't raised in it. And I kind of get that, because when I was in the church, I would use being a convert almost as if it gave me more authority, because it's like, well, I didn't just get into this because I was conditioned into it, like I chose it, but then I like have come to learn that like, I was still conditioned into it, just in a completely different way.
And like vulnerable to that type of thing.
So I think the message we'd like for people to take away from this video, if you're Mormon, is just give ex-Mormons a break. Like, whether or not you believe that their conclusions about the church's truthfulness or lack thereof are legitimate, you still need to recognize that that's their truth. Like, they do not believe it's true, and it is heartbreaking for them that it's not, that they can't make it true anymore, and they're probably grieving. And if you're an ex-Mormon and you can't leave the church alone, that's okay. Maybe it's a phase, maybe it's not. Who knows? We don't know if this is a phase. We haven't... To
me, it's about paying it, honestly, like paying it backward. It's like the life that I told my mom this in the last conversation I had with her. I was like, I don't regret, reached a point in my personal healing where I don't regret being raised in the church, being taught the way that I was. Sometimes I still get hung up on things, and it's like, that's so dumb, and obviously get angry at modern church policies or whatever. But because I recognize that I enjoy my life so much today, largely in part because I've seen the other side, and so now I appreciate so many things so much more. It's given me just like an incredible perspective. Having your whole worldview shift is like a really unique opportunity
So
that not a
unique.
lot of people in the world get to experience, but it's like having another shot at life, and it's really beautiful. So the work that we do here is like, there were so many people who helped us do that, and so I feel
Yeah.
grateful, you know, John Delan,
Yeah.
all the Tanners, the various authors and bloggers and podcasters who helped us get here. It's like we couldn't have done it without them. And so thinking about the people who are affected by our stuff, it's just like we want to make it easier for them too.
And as Tana said at the beginning, we don't make our content for Mormons, and kind of the nature of online content creation is that people can choose to watch it or they can not choose to watch it. So obviously we recognize that the people that will watch this will mostly be people who it resonates with, and if it doesn't resonate with you, that's fine. Like, we're not trying to appeal to you. Like, we're just like speaking our truth and, you know, talking about our experiences and what we believe, and if that resonates with you and helps you in some way, great, and if it doesn't, like, don't watch our videos. That's great. Like, we would never expect you to.
Thanks for watching.